There's a village in Romania where the elderly still refuse to throw away broken pottery. Instead, they collect the fragments in small wooden boxes and keep them for decades, sometimes passing them down to their children and grandchildren. When I asked one old woman why she hoarded these useless pieces, she looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom and said something that changed my understanding of human nature forever. She said, "These pieces remember what it was like to be whole. One day, when the time is right, they will teach us how to put ourselves back together again." At first, I thought this was just the romantic sentiment of someone who had lived through too much loss to let go of anything. But then I discovered the work of Mircea Eliade, and I realized that this old woman had inadvertently described the most profound truth about human existence. We are all walking around carrying pieces of something that was once complete, something we dimly remember but can't quite grasp, something that calls to us from a place so deep in our memory that it feels like a dream we had before we were born. What that old woman understood, and what Eliade spent his entire career trying to help modern people remember, is that human beings are not fundamentally broken or incomplete. We're not lacking anything that needs to be acquired or achieved or earned through struggle and effort. We're simply experiencing a kind of spiritual amnesia, a forgetting so profound that we've convinced ourselves that the wholeness we seek has never existed in the first place. But the broken pottery teaches us otherwise. The fact that we can recognize brokenness means we carry within us a template of wholeness. The fact that we feel something is missing means we remember, on some level deeper than conscious thought, what it felt like when nothing was missing at all. This isn't philosophical speculation or wishful thinking. This is the foundation of what Eliade called homo religiosus, the religious human being who understands intuitively that existence itself is sacred, and that every moment of life is an opportunity to reconnect with a divine source that has never actually been separate from us. But here's what happens to most of us. We're born into a world that has forgotten how to recognize the sacred dimension of ordinary experience. From our earliest days, we're taught to see ourselves as isolated individuals, competing for scarce resources in a universe that is fundamentally meaningless, except for whatever purposes we manage to impose on it through our own will and effort. We're taught that the material world is all there is, that consciousness is just an accident of brain chemistry, and that any sense of connection to something larger than ourselves is either wishful thinking or psychological weakness. We learn to live in what Eliade called profane time, where each day is just another step forward in a linear progression that leads ultimately to death and dissolution. In profane time, the past is gone forever, the future is uncertain, and the present moment is just a fleeting transition between what was and what might be. This is the world where the pottery stays broken, because brokenness is accepted as the natural and final state of all things. This is the world where we spend our lives trying to accumulate enough achievements, relationships, experiences, and possessions to distract ourselves from the fundamental emptiness we feel at the core of our being. Yet even in this world of separation and scarcity, something keeps breaking through. Even when we've been thoroughly conditioned to see ourselves as nothing more than biological machines, programmed to survive and reproduce, moments arrive that completely contradict everything we've been taught about the nature of reality. Maybe you're walking down a familiar street and suddenly the afternoon light hits the buildings in a way that makes everything look like it's made of liquid gold, and for just an instant you feel like you're seeing the world for the first time, like you've been sleepwalking your entire life and have just woken up. Maybe you're listening to a piece of music and something about the melody or the harmony opens a door in your chest that you didn't even know was there, and through that door pours a feeling of recognition so overwhelming that you start crying without knowing why. Maybe you're holding your child or your partner or even just watching strangers on the subway, and suddenly you see through their surface appearances to something luminous and eternal that makes you understand in your bones that everything you've ever loved in any person is the same love looking back at you through temporary forms. These are not random peak experiences or pleasant accidents. According to Eliade, these moments are hierophanies, manifestations of the sacred that break through the artificial boundaries we've constructed between the spiritual and material realms. The word hierophany literally means the appearing of the sacred, and it points to something that ancient peoples understood but modern consciousness has largely forgotten. The divine is not hiding in some distant heaven waiting to be found. The divine is the essential nature of reality itself, continuously revealing itself in every blade of grass, every human face, every moment of genuine connection between one being and another. What we call ordinary life is actually a constant stream of sacred revelations, but we've trained ourselves not to see them. We're like people who have spent so many years wearing dark glasses that we've forgotten the sun exists. And then when someone removes our glasses for just a moment, we're so overwhelmed by the brightness that we assume we must be hallucinating. The tragedy is that we dismiss these breakthrough moments as exceptions rather than recognizing them as glimpses of our natural state. We treat them as brief escapes from reality, rather than sudden returns to reality from the trance of separation we've been living in. We think they prove that we're occasionally capable of transcending our ordinary consciousness, rather than understanding that they reveal what our consciousness actually is, when it's not being filtered through the lens of forgetfulness. Eliade understood that this amnesia is not a personal failing or a sign that we've done something wrong. It's a collective condition that affects entire cultures and civilizations when they lose touch with what he called sacred time. In sacred time, life is not a linear progression from birth to death, but a participation in eternal patterns that are constantly renewing themselves. In sacred time, every ending contains the seed of a new beginning. Every death opens space for new life. Every winter leads inevitably to spring. People who live in sacred time understand that they are not isolated individuals struggling to create meaning in a meaningless universe. They know that they are expressions of a larger intelligence that is continuously creating and recreating the world through them. You know what touches me most when I read your messages? It's realizing that we're not alone in this search. If you're listening to me now and feel that emptiness, that sensation that something important is missing in your life, I want you to know that I understand exactly what you're going through. There were moments when I also felt completely disconnected from the sacred, lost in the midst of a routine that seemed to suck all the magic out of existence. That's why I want to ask you a very direct question. What was the last moment you felt there was something greater than yourself present in your life? It could have been contemplating a sunset, listening to music, or simply in an instant of silence. If you feel comfortable, write in the comments, "I miss the sacred in my daily life," and briefly tell when that last moment was. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to read today to feel less alone in this journey. And I promise I'll read each comment with the care it deserves. Now, if you're starting to feel a sense of recognition as I describe these concepts, if something inside you is saying, yes, this is what I've been trying to understand my entire life, then you're beginning to remember something that has always been true about you. You're beginning to remember that the spiritual search is not about acquiring something new, but about removing the obstacles to seeing what has always been there. You're beginning to remember that you didn't come into this world empty and needing to be filled. You came into this world already complete, already connected to the source of all meaning and love and creative power. But somewhere along the way, you were convinced to forget this truth. The beautiful thing is that no amount of forgetting can actually destroy what is essentially true about you. It can only cover it over. The way clouds can temporarily hide the sun without affecting its radiance in any way. And just as the sun continues to shine regardless of weather conditions, your essential nature continues to radiate love and wisdom and creative potential regardless of how many layers of conditioning have accumulated over it. Eliade discovered that every culture in human history has developed practices and traditions designed to help people remember their connection to sacred time and sacred space. These weren't arbitrary inventions or superstitious beliefs. They were sophisticated technologies for awakening consciousness to its own divine nature. Ancient temples were not just buildings where people went to worship distant gods. They were carefully designed spaces that served as doorways between the ordinary world and the realm of sacred experience. When people entered these spaces and performed the prescribed rituals, they were not trying to please external deities or earn spiritual merit. They were creating conditions that made it easier to remember who they really were underneath all their surface identities and concerns. They understood that the human mind has a tendency to get caught up in the details of survival and forget the larger context of existence. So they created regular opportunities to step outside of everyday consciousness and reconnect with the eternal dimension of their being. But here's what's remarkable about Eliade's insight. You don't need ancient temples or elaborate rituals to access sacred time and sacred space. You already carry within you everything necessary to remember your essential nature and reconnect with the source of meaning that gives life its deepest significance. Every time you pause in the middle of a busy day and really look at the sky, you're creating a temple. Every time you listen deeply to someone who's sharing something important with you, you're participating in a sacred ritual. Every time you do something creative, not because you have to, but because something inside you wants to express itself, You're opening a doorway between the ordinary and the miraculous. The key is learning to recognize these moments for what they actually are. Opportunities to remember that you live in a universe that is fundamentally alive, intelligent, and responsive to your deepest needs and highest aspirations. If you press the like button on this video, you'll be creating a small but significant ripple in the field of consciousness that connects all of us. You'll be saying yes to remembering, yes to awakening, yes to the possibility that your life can be a continuous experience of meaning and connection, rather than a series of random events that you have to struggle to make sense of. Your engagement matters more than you know, not just for the algorithm, but for the collective awakening that happens when people start remembering their true nature. This is why Eliade was so fascinated by what he called the axis mundi, the cosmic center where heaven and earth intersect. In traditional cosmology, this was often represented as a mountain or tree or pillar that connected the human realm with the divine realm. But Eliade understood that the axis mundi is not really a place you have to travel to. It's a state of consciousness you can access wherever you are, whenever you remember that you yourself are the meeting point between matter and spirit, time and eternity, the human and the divine. When you stand in this awareness, even for just a moment, you become a conduit through which the sacred can manifest in the ordinary world. You become what the mystics called a bridge between worlds, someone who helps other people remember their own divine nature simply by embodying your own. The challenge for modern people is not that we lack access to sacred experience, but that we've been conditioned to dismiss it when it appears. We live in a culture that values only what can be measured, quantified, and controlled. So when we have experiences that are subtle, subjective, and beyond the reach of rational analysis, we tend to discount them as unreal or unimportant. We've been taught that if something can't be replicated in a laboratory, it probably isn't worth paying attention to. But consciousness itself can't be replicated in a laboratory. Love can't be replicated in a laboratory. Creativity, meaning, purpose, inspiration, all the things that make life worth living exist in a realm that science can describe but not capture. This doesn't mean they're less real than physical phenomena. It means they belong to a different order of reality, one that can only be known through direct experience rather than external observation. What Eliade discovered is that traditional peoples understood this distinction and organized their entire lives around creating regular opportunities for direct spiritual experience. They didn't separate the sacred from the secular, because they understood that everything is potentially sacred depending on how you approach it. Planting crops could be a spiritual practice if done with awareness of your partnership with the earth and the cosmic forces that govern growth and decay. Preparing food could be a form of worship if done with gratitude for the plants and animals that gave their lives to nourish you. Raising children could be a way of participating in the divine creativity that continuously brings new life into the world. Even the most ordinary activities could become doorways to transcendent experience if approached with the right quality of attention and intention. This is the secret that the broken pottery was trying to teach. Wholeness is not something you have to create from scratch. It's something you have to remember. The pieces don't need to be forced back together through willpower and effort. They need to be held in awareness until they remember their original pattern and begin to reorganize themselves naturally around their essential unity. This is what happens when you stop trying to fix yourself and start simply paying attention to what is already true about you, underneath all the thoughts and feelings and stories that usually occupy your attention. This is what happens when you stop looking for the sacred somewhere else and start recognizing the sacred dimension of wherever you already are. And this brings us to what might be the most practical and revolutionary aspect of Eliade's understanding: the recognition that you don't need to change your external circumstances in order to transform your experience of life. You don't need to quit your job or end your relationship or move to a different city or take up meditation or join a spiritual community, though any of these things might be helpful if they feel genuinely right for you. What you need to do is much simpler and much more challenging. You need to start treating your current life as if it were already sacred, as if every person you encounter and every task you perform and every moment you experience were an opportunity to participate in something infinitely meaningful and beautiful. This doesn't mean pretending that difficult situations aren't difficult or that painful emotions aren't painful. Sacred time includes suffering and struggle just as much as it includes joy and peace. The difference is that in sacred time, even suffering has meaning. because it's understood as part of a larger pattern of death and rebirth that ultimately leads to greater wholeness and wisdom. When you live in sacred time, you don't need your life to be perfect in order to be grateful for it. You don't need to feel good all the time in order to appreciate the gift of being alive. You understand that every experience, whether pleasant or unpleasant, is a teacher that can help you remember something important about your true nature if you're willing to receive its instruction. The myth of eternal return, which was central to Eliade's understanding of sacred time, teaches us that every moment is simultaneously a unique occurrence and a repetition of something eternal. This means that whatever you're going through right now, whatever challenges you're facing, whatever joys you're experiencing, you're not going through them alone or for the first time. You're participating in patterns that have been unfolding since the beginning of time and will continue to unfold long after your particular life has ended. This doesn't diminish the significance of your individual experience. It places your experience in a context so vast and meaningful that even your struggles become contributions to the cosmic evolution of consciousness itself. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognizes that there's a different path, a deeper way to understand your own spiritual journey. I know what it's like to feel lost amid so much noise of the modern world, seeking answers that always seem to slip through your fingers. That's why I created this space, this refuge where we can explore together the ancient wisdom that still pulses alive in our hearts. When you subscribe to this channel, you're not just clicking a button, you're joining a community of people who, like you, feel that life has deeper layers waiting to be discovered. Here you'll find not just knowledge, but genuine embrace for your thirst for meaning. Subscribe now and be part of this journey of rediscovering the sacred in everyday life. Your soul deserves this gift. So how do you begin to live from this understanding? How do you start to treat your ordinary life as sacred without falling into spiritual bypassing or losing your capacity to deal effectively with practical responsibilities? The answer lies in what Eliade called the practice of conscious participation. This means bringing a quality of presence and intentionality to whatever you're doing that transforms it from mere routine into ritual, from mere activity into worship, from mere existence into genuine living. It means remembering, as often as you can, that you are not just a separate individual trying to get through another day, but an expression of the sacred creativity that is continuously manifesting itself as the entire universe. When you remember this, everything changes. The person who cuts you off in traffic becomes another face of the divine having a difficult moment. The deadline you're stressed about becomes an opportunity to practice trust in the larger intelligence that guides all timing. The conflict with your family becomes a chance to offer love where fear and frustration have created separation. This is not about becoming perfect or always maintaining spiritual awareness. It's about gradually shifting your default assumption about the nature of reality, from separation to connection, from scarcity to abundance, from meaninglessness to profound significance. It's about collecting your own broken pottery pieces, the fragments of sacred experience that still sparkle in your memory, and trusting that they remember how to become whole again. It's about sharing this remembering with others who are also ready to wake up from the trance of forgetfulness and step back into the sacred time that has always been their birthright. When Eliade studied the mythologies and religious practices of cultures around the world, he discovered something remarkable. Every tradition, no matter how different their surface beliefs appeared, shared a common understanding that human beings naturally exist in two different modes of consciousness. There's the mode we're familiar with in modern life, where we experience ourselves as separate individuals navigating a world of objects and obstacles, trying to satisfy our desires and avoid our fears. And then there's another mode, which traditional peoples considered to be our primary nature, where we experience ourselves as inseparable expressions of a living, intelligent cosmos that is continuously creating itself through us and as us. The first mode creates what we call problems: loneliness, anxiety, boredom, meaninglessness, the constant sense that something is missing or wrong. The second mode reveals that what we thought were problems were actually invitations to remember our true nature and step back into our original relationship with existence. The reason this understanding is so powerful is that it completely reframes your relationship with difficulty and suffering. When you're operating from the assumption that you're a separate self trying to control an external world, every challenge feels like evidence that you're failing, or that life is unfair, or that you're somehow inadequate to the task of being human. But when you remember that you're actually an expression of the same creative intelligence that manifests as mountains and oceans and galaxies, then challenges become opportunities for that intelligence to know itself more deeply through your experience. Your struggles become sacred because they're the way consciousness explores its own depths and discovers new possibilities for growth and creativity. Your joys become sacred because they're moments when consciousness recognizes itself and celebrates its own infinite nature. This doesn't mean that all experiences feel good or that all situations are easy to navigate. It means that every experience, regardless of how it feels, becomes meaningful when it's understood as part of a larger process of cosmic awakening. The pain of loss teaches consciousness about impermanence and the preciousness of love. The frustration of limitation teaches consciousness about the creative power that emerges from working skillfully within constraints. Even the experience of forgetting your divine nature teaches consciousness about the profound relief and joy that comes with remembering. From this perspective, your entire life, with all its ups and downs, its moments of clarity and periods of confusion, becomes a sacred offering to the evolution of awareness itself. You stop needing your life to be different than it is and start recognizing how it already is exactly what it needs to be for consciousness to know itself ever more completely through your unique perspective and experience. I hope that as we reach the end of our journey together today, you're beginning to feel that sense of recognition I mentioned at the beginning, that feeling that you're remembering something you've always known rather than learning something entirely new, because that's exactly what's happening. Every insight that resonates with you, every moment of understanding that brings a sense of relief or expansion or coming home, is not me teaching you something foreign to your nature. It's your own deepest wisdom recognizing itself in these words and concepts. It's the broken pottery of your soul, remembering how to reassemble itself into the magnificent vessel it has always been. The path forward is both simpler and more challenging than you might expect. It's simpler because you don't need to go anywhere or become anyone other than who you already are. The sacred dimension of existence is not waiting for you to improve yourself or solve all your problems or achieve some particular state of consciousness. It's here right now, woven into this very moment, available to be recognized whenever you remember to look with the eyes of wonder that you were born with. But it's also more challenging than you might expect because remembering requires you to question everything you've been taught about the nature of reality and your place in it. It requires you to trust your own direct experience even when it contradicts the consensus view of how life works. It requires you to live from a place of faith in the ultimate goodness and intelligence of existence, even when circumstances seem to suggest otherwise. But here's what I want you to know as you continue on your own journey of remembering. You don't have to do this alone, and you don't have to do it perfectly. The very fact that you're here, listening to these words, engaging with these ideas, is evidence that the awakening is already happening through you. You're part of a growing community of people who are ready to remember their divine nature and live from that remembering in whatever way feels authentic to them. Some will express it through art or music or poetry. Others will express it through service or healing or teaching. Still others will express it simply through being more present and loving in their everyday relationships and responsibilities. There's no right way to be a conscious human being. There's only your way, the unique path of awakening that only you can walk, because only you have your particular combination of gifts and challenges, wounds and wisdoms, dreams and limitations. This is the gift that Eliade left for us, the understanding that paradise was never lost because paradise was never a place. Paradise is a way of seeing, a quality of being, a depth of presence that transforms wherever you are into the garden of divine experience. And this paradise is available to you right now in this moment, not because you've earned it or because you're special, but because you already have everything you desire. You just needed someone to remind you to remember. You just needed to hear again what the old woman with the broken pottery knew in her bones, that the fragments remember wholeness, that what appears broken contains within itself the template for its own healing, and that your longing for the sacred is itself the sacred calling you home to yourself.